Good evening. My name is Johanna Koljonen and you are watching Crosstalks, a collaboration between two of Sweden's leading universities, Stockholm University and KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology. We are broadcasting today from Stockholm University's Department of Computer and Systems Sciences at the Nord building in Kista Science City, just outside of Stockholm. You can join us in discussing today's topics on Twitter, where our handle is Crosstalks TV and our hashtag is Crosstalks. Games are big business. The games industry has long since eclipsed the film industry in terms of revenue. But not only that, games, both digital and analog, are a dominant cultural medium and strongly influence other fields of society. There is no such thing as a single gaming world. The first generation of digital gamer natives are now in their 50s, and mobile games are reaching all demographics. Developers targeting hardcore gamers are pushing the boundaries of hardware and software, while the indie and analog sectors are pushing game design further. How will today's emerging technologies like virtual reality and the Internet of Things shape the future of digital games? And what can the games we play tell us about the human experience? And how does game design influence other areas, from education to robotics? Joining us in the studio to discuss these topics are Björn Thuresson, Senior Researcher and Manager of the Visualisation Studio VIC at KTH Royal Institute of Technology, Petter Ögren, Associate Professor in Robotics and Autonomous Systems at KTH Royal Institute of Technology, and Tobias Falk, Associate Professor, Department of Computer and Systems Sciences, Stockholm University. Welcome to Crosstalks. Give them a big hand. Tobias, you've said that games have had a key role in developing our relationship with machines. Ours, I'm assuming in this context, is humans. Could you develop this a little bit?
Well, not machines in general, I think with computers, because a while back, computers tended to be big and ugly and sort of boring. But then suddenly something emerged. I think it was the Nintendo Game & Watch, the tiny device you held in your hands. You could play one game. But it's sort of the ancestor of the smartphone today, because with the game pads, with the handheld devices, and eventually with the Nintendo Entertainment System and the consoles, we started interacting with computers in a way that created an emotional bond. And how did that come about? I think it was the tactile touch, the fact that we touched them, and we got instant feedback, and they also created a lot of frustration for us. And I think there was a great foundation for a loving relationship. So we started to invest a lot of time and emotion into these computers, and they gave us back the gift of being heroes in our own narrative. So we moved from being bystanders and watchers to being doers, and that was so empowering. I think that we kept investing love and time with these, and now we walk around with computers as pets, more or less.
And certainly at the beginning, of course, in the early days of digital gaming, it was frustrating also because it was quite difficult. So it was also something that motivated people to do things with computers, which was a subculture back then, which you may be too young to remember, but that wasn't an everyday thing. Björn, you run the Visualisation Studio at KTH, where you experiment with and provide a wide range of game-related technologies for students and researchers to use. Now, why are these technologies interesting, and why do the students and researchers need them?
Yes, the gaming as a culture and as a technical product, it is driving so much of the development at the moment. And now we are, for the first time ever, we have early access to both hardware and software. The actual production environments that are being used in the industry, we can have access to that. And we can explore with the same type of means as is used in the commercial product. And to give access for the students to have that access, I think it's absolutely excellent.
But is this primarily for people learning to make games, or are you using them for everything?
Absolutely not. Games, of course, it is a container that is somewhat tantalizing, and it's often a good demo to show off ideas, to prototype in a gaming-like environment. And they can do that now. In a couple of weeks, they can produce a game that includes a lot of explorations in graphics, in interactions, because it can include all those aspects into it. So that is not necessarily, but that's a driver. But since same tools can be used in completely other domains, and explore that. And you can use both the tools and the means of expression that are used in a well-known environment like the gaming environment in other contexts.
And we'll hear about an example of that right now. Petter, you're working on with robots for use in emergency situations, fire, earthquakes, leaks of hazardous agents, and so on. Situations where it would be difficult or dangerous for humans to enter. And one of the challenges, as I understand it, now correct me if I'm wrong, this is how I get this. One of the challenges with these robots is how to control them remotely. And to create the more efficient way of doing this, you've adopted a user interface from first-person shooter games, allowing the pilot to control the robot in a visual interface that looks familiar from these environments, and also with similar kinds of hand controls. Now, is this because everyone in the generation of firefighters has a background playing computer games, which is statistically likely, or are there other benefits for these particular kinds of control systems?
Well, the key observation we made is that teleoperating a robot is very similar to playing one of these first perspective computer games, since you are actually controlling an entity moving around in an environment somewhere else, virtual or real, carrying out a mission or a task, searching through a building or whatever. So, and it turns out the gaming industry obviously is very large. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So they're really good at interfaces. So there's basically the interface they use is good, and a lot of people use it, as you indicated. So both these are reasons for us to use it. And the fact is actually, in this computer game genre, they started out using what is now used on most robots, something called tank control.
So what's tank control?
That's basically where you kind of the naive way of controlling. These robots are kind of 1 meter big. They have caterpillar tracks on both, so it looks like a little tank. And then the naive way of controlling them is like forwards, backwards, turn on the spot, and then you have a different stick for the pan tilt camera.
2 sticks. One drives, one looks.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Whereas in the computer games, in this genre, you basically have 2 sticks, one controlling translation and the other controlling rotation. It's supposed to model a person on foot, basically. So as I mentioned, the interface is very good. That's why they use it. But as you mentioned, a lot of people, and we're talking tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions, have used them. So that's also a reason to use them.
I think we still need to elucidate translation and what was the other one? Orientation. So because it's still 2 sticks, and one is still for looking, and the other is still for driving. So what is different is that they're relative to each other.
Yes.
So forward is always the direction I'm looking.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, so like in a computer game today. Yeah.
Like in a computer,
or in my life.
Yes,
indeed.
in your life,
yes.
Because you're a person on foot most time.
Yeah. So the direction I'm looking is my forward always.
Yes.
This makes a lot more sense. It's very strange that they weren't built like that from the beginning.
The robots, you mean?
Yes.
Well, it turns out the thing with a robot with caterpillar tracks, it can't really move sidewards, whereas you and I can, right? But the key observation is what matters is what the camera does, because the camera is what gives the operator the visual feedback, obviously. So the camera can move sideways if the robot kind of turns sideways and the camera counter-rotates and then moves sideways. So we're kind of hiding this, the orientation and the movement of the platform itself, and just let the user kind of control a floating camera, if you will.
So indeed, much like in the computer game, you're hiding the mechanics inside the system, so to speak, and I just tell it what I want to do. It's very, very good. Tobias, you teach game production, and you've said that one of the challenges in this field is the lack of established vocabulary for game design, essentially, for game production. How has that not established? We've been doing this for 30 years.
Yeah, let's compare it to film. In film, after 3 decades, a director and teacher called Sergei Eisenstein, he wrote a book about the language of film. And we actually still use those guidelines for making movies. It simplified communication about making movies a lot. And it still does. When you work with games, I think every studio has their own way of talking about games. But in general, if you look at a game, the task is to create a movement, an urge for the player to move through an environment. But we talk about levels and we talk about mechanics, but we don't have words to describe, for example, space and time in a game level or parts of a level. We don't have words for describing shifts in tempo, shifts in tension, for example. And why is that? Probably because a lot of game studios are secretive about their work. And there has been very little written about the process of making games. So today, I mean, we really don't know how they made Half-Life 2, and that's a shame. There is not a document. There's no document about it. So I think my experience in working with games is that it takes a lot of time and effort to make a game, because instead of planning it using a unified language, you have to build the game and try it, and then talk about what you experienced, and then you have to build it again.
So it's very difficult, certainly across companies at least, to talk about this on a conceptual level,
Exactly,
which slows down development.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I see. Now, our audience is in all kinds of fields, but I, to my astonishment, this turned into an ethnographic conversation very fast. I think we would need some field studies inside different organizations to gather terminology. Would that help, or do you think?
I think.
How do we approach this?
I may be the only one who was bothered by this, but it was, the comparison to film and television was so obvious. It was difficult to make people talk to each other within a team, because everyone is a specialist, and they have their language for their specialty. But the general design challenge of creating a level design based upon the game design is actually in desperate need of a simplified grammar. I think you should lock, some great game designers in a room, I shouldn't name names, but
You could name names.
good, no, but good, clever game designers. Lock them in the room and say, write the book on a language for game design and simplify life for a lot of people.
Quite often, I think this would be a task for universities. And as a person who is not affiliated with the university, I'm looking at all of you now expectantly to make this happen.
It has happened quite a few times, but it's the uptake of it that is a challenge. We have a few very knowledgeable people with experience from the industry that have attempted this template-based and try a formal language, but the uptake is always challenged. When you, for whatever reason, try and formulate something, that is always challenged, and every company or other big players in the field, they want to use their own terminology, and they want to protect that. So it would be a challenge. There is no Sergei Eisenstein with that kind of influence, that an accepted influence anywhere out there.
And the greatest designers are not always the greatest theorists. A lot of good directors were around before Eisenstein as well. Yeah. But the games industry is attractive to technical students right now. Is it just because it's like Hollywood, that's just what everybody is dreaming of now, because that's the culture we're all consuming now, or are there some other reasons, do you think?
My students are extremely challenged by the technical aspects of it, and the commercial prospects that can lead to. That is also a driver. One should not forget that.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No. That is fine. But since the challenges are out there and they're easily explorable now, you can get a first version of a game in a couple of weeks, and you can, if you go for a mobile platform, you can have it out in 10, 14 days. You can have the first version out there, try it out, and see what happens. And that is that type of development is not what has not been the case in IT development before, but it's getting to that level now, and that is extremely interesting to many. And then you have, of course, the challenges of doing this product, which tens of millions, if they happen to be successful, and anything up to 1 million, then you typically break even. But you can have games with tens of millions of users. That type of to running that show, to build those simultaneous access servers, that it's interesting challenges.
And it's because often when we're thinking about the industry, people are sort of thinking out, well, they're going to need some animators and probably some game designers who are interested in mechanics, but it's all kinds of server challenges and all of these other things.
It's in all stages, but it's part of the same project, which is also interesting, because you can get access to many different parts of a very, very big technical challenge. The big AAA games, they are perhaps among the biggest IT projects in the world. It's teams of 200 people over 2, 3, 4, 5 years with budgets that are ridiculously high. So compared to other IT projects, they are huge.
I would assume, again, from statistics, that probably close to 100% of all of your students are digital gamers. Do you think it changes them? For instance, Petter, the people who come into robotics, do they bring something from games that makes them approach things differently?
Yes, I think so. I mean, they certainly, when we're working on these topics and we're trying to get inspiration from games in other aspects of the research as well. I mean, they obviously all this rich experience from the gaming community with the similarities it has to robotics is of benefit for us as a research group.
Yeah. What about you, Tobias?
Well, I have to say that sometimes it's really refreshing to see a student that's not totally obsessed with games. You know, that actually refers to other media or other sources of inspiration. Because a lot of gamers are very passionate about games, and that's a good thing. And it's you know, it could be a good creative atmosphere. It could also be a bit stifling and tend to be a sort of a I don't want to sound too negative now, but it can be sort of gamers tend to reuse the influence that they get from old games. So you don't see a lot of fresh ideas in game design, but you see versions of games they played before, and that can be sometimes a bit tiring.
I do hear the same from people, for instance, from film funders and so on, that when people who become directors always want to make the movies that influence them when they were younger, even though the stuff they watch today perhaps is TV shows. Nobody wants to make that. They want to make the adventure film or something. So maybe that there is a little risk there on the content side, so to speak, of games, that we're going to reuse tired ideas and own concepts. So some of that is driven by nostalgia, which I think is completely valid.
And it's not all bad. Game mechanics can be used and reused and re-explored, but it's very clear that you can see the cycles of titles that influence a lot of people. We have had a lot of Portal-like games in the last couple of years because it's the type of mechanic that inspires people. And you can fairly easily get a first version up and see what happens. So, but you can definitely spot the cycles.
Joining us, I think now via Skype, is award-winning game creator Brenda Romero. Hi, Brenda. Welcome to Crosstalks.
Hi, thank you.
You're a rare beast in games because you have these double careers, both on the commercial side and doing more conceptual board game work. With this double vision, what do you think is the most interesting frontier in game development now?
For me, and I think for a great many other people, it's that digital distribution has changed the playing field. So there's no longer first of all, the cost of goods challenge. Interestingly enough, I was at a board game event last night where we were playing some prototypes, and people were talking about that the cost of the board game pretty much equals the cost of shipping it. So if you're thinking about, say, doing a Kickstarter for a board game, and compare this to something, just basically you do a build and you do an update and out goes your game to the world. And so that's something we all have access to now. And it so happens that the ability to do that, and I heard some of your other guests talking about how easy it is to create games with the huge variety of tools that are out there right now. So that makes it much easier for people to create games and get games out there. But this also coincided with, I would say, a general shift toward accepting a much wider variety of games, where before you had to have teams of 200 to 400 people, 100 people, whatever, just massive teams working on a game that was incredibly graphics intensive. Nowadays, you don't need to do that. I mean, if you take a look at Minecraft, that was originally created by one guy, and it's changed the playing field. So to me, that is the most exciting thing, that you can get 4 or 5 people together. You can do some game jams. It's something we're doing now, in fact, working on a game with our family. You can get a few people together and put together a game that you can release commercially and hopefully find some success with.
You famously designed board games as a way to visualize difficult experiences, and actually this also started as a moment of parenting. Could you tell us just briefly about this and about what you brought with you into your professional work from that, or your commercial work?
Well, so the series of board games that I design, in some cases, it takes a long time to complete them. I'm making one about the Trail of Tears now that has 50,000 individual pieces. And so that obviously takes a long time to make those. I make each one myself, paint each one myself. And from these, I guess what I really like about these is it's an opportunity to explore games as craft. And the only pressure on me to make these games is to make them as good as I possibly can with whatever skills I have. Because I'm not releasing them commercially. In the case of the games that are in the Mechanic is the Message series, which is I'm assuming what you're referring to, those games, I don't even sell them. One of them is currently in the National Museum of Play, and they're literally one-of-a-kind pieces. And so for me, the biggest thing that they gave me is just this a renewed passion for making games and the craft of making games that sometimes can be missing from the commercial space because you're under a lot of deadlines. It's high pressure. You're often forced to cut some corners in order to get the product out on time.
I am curious, though. The Mechanics is the Message series is a series of board games where you've tackled topics such as for genocide, for instance. Some of the toughest and darkest topics in the world and some of the most difficult to conceptualize. And games are very good because they are structured by rule systems. They are a very good way of telling about power dynamics. And that's what I believe that those games do. Still, you seem to be alluding to the fact that there wouldn't be a big market or that it wouldn't be feasible to tell those kinds of stories in the commercial space. But we do make movies about these kinds of things.
You can. No, absolutely you can tell those stories in the commercial space. There's no doubt about it. In fact, there's been some games recently released that have dealt with those topics commercially, both board games and analog games. So you can. It's the scale that I make my games on. For instance, this one with 50,000 pieces. I don't know a publisher who'd touch a game with 50,000 pieces that will probably cost. I don't know what it'll cost when I'm done with it, but I can't even imagine what size box one would need to put that in. Mm-hmm. So. So I think games can handle any topic. Films can handle any topic. Paintings can handle any topic. Games are a form of art. And as a form of art, most importantly to me, that's a system. If they're, in the case of the games that I cover, if you cannot have mass human-on-human conflict without there being some kind of system involved. And if there is a system, I can make a game about it.
Also joining us now on Skype is Sigurlina Ingvarsdottir, senior producer at DICE here in Stockholm, where her work is on major AAA titles. Welcome to Crosstalks.
Thank you very much.
So, Sigurlina, from your vantage point in the industry, what do you find the most interesting thing happening in games right now?
I think, following up from what Brenda was saying, one of the things that I feel is so interesting is how gaming are becoming so mainstream and so pervasive, and so many companies and so many individuals are making games. And even if we have the stereotype of the gamer as a very sort of specific type, a male in his late teens or 20s, I don't think that tag fits anymore. I think we're all gamers. And when I look at my kids, as an example, playing with tablets or iPhones, or we have games on all media all around us, it seems that it has brought a lot of play into the lives of adults. I had a moment lying in bed next to my husband playing the game Hearthstone while he was playing Magic the Gathering online. We're grown-up people with serious jobs, leading grown-up lives. But games are such a big part, and play is such a big part of our lives. And to me, that's very interesting. How does that make us different from generations before us? Because I don't see my parents, or I didn't see my parents spending so much time playing, or I can't think of my grandparents playing like we do.
That's very interesting. Let's see, does the panel have some reflections on this? So we're talking about a sort of cultural change where adults get to play. And you guys are all doing it at work, I'm assuming. What does it mean? Tobias?
Well, it means that you're active, that you're always exploring and doing things. I think when you start doing that, it's not that it's no turning back to other forms of media, but it's very addictive, and it's so much fun, and it's such a great you can lead several different lives this way. You can try out several different personalities and have so many different experiences. So I think people who don't play games, they really should try it.
What do you think, Petter? Because, I mean, isn't there a taint? Certainly in the Nordic countries, I'm saying this for Brenda and for our international audience, it's still considered a little bit dubious. Grown-ups should not be playing. Games are better because we have a different word for that, so it sounds slightly more serious. But play, as in child's play, is very frowned upon. So if you're doing serious work with serious robots, should you be giving them game controllers?
It's a good question, but I think one interesting thing about, I mean, it allows you to meet your children playing. I can play FIFA with my 8-year-old daughter, so it's kind of, and maybe we can continue that when I become a grandfather. So that's a great thing.
I just realized for the first time that will probably happen. We will probably, I mean, maybe we'll have family dinners when I'm like 86, and then the kids will be in their 60s and so on, and then we'll play console games together or whatever they'll be called then.
And just remember the games we played. Because I play all the games with my son. He's 12 now. We play everything. And just imagine in 30 years going back to GTA 5, what happened then and what we did. It must be kind of interesting to have those kind of joint reference points.
Yeah.
Just another reflection on I think many of these adults, it's somewhat dubious to be a gamer. But I don't think many of these adults, they consider themselves gamers. And they don't even play games. They play, we can name a bunch of games. They play the games. They play Candy Crush. They play Word Feud. They play that. But I don't think they rarely would label themselves as gamers. So to them it's an activity.
That's a bit of a political stance to say, well, we are reserving the term gamer for a specific subculture. It's very difficult. I mean, I'm okay with that, but then should we have another word for the kind of play that we are all as a culture engaging in?
I definitely don't think it's a problem. I'm just thinking that it's dubious to play games, but these people, even though they are active and do that, they don't think they're part of that problem that they might have with other gamers.
So I'm going to return a little bit to this topic of complex tech projects, because Björn was mentioning before that developing major AAA titles are some of the most complex tech projects around. Sigurlina, could you share a little bit about because this is what you do for a living. You run these insane projects. I know you love technology, but what is the specific attraction of doing this?
I think that my background is that I'm an industrial engineer, so I've always been extremely fascinated by large-scale production systems and the interaction of many systems. And games, developing these games when the professor referred to them as possibly one of the biggest IT projects that were being run, that's probably true. And they are incredibly complex because not only are they extremely technology based, but they're also it's a marriage of science and art, and no two games are the same. Even if you develop on the same engine for the same IP, you're still evolving a lot of factors for it, and then you can iterate and you can plan and you can set up the structures for these projects. And at companies like the one that I work for, DICE, which is owned by EA, we have a great structure and a framework around our development. But there are so many unknown factors for every aspect of the game development that it becomes this marriage of science and art. And for me, in order to run my project, I have to rely as much on data and graphs telling me how we are doing as my gut feeling and sort of the sense of things around me. So it's an incredibly complex, dynamic organization.
Brenda, what do you think about the tech side of games development? Is it in some ways now that games is finally entering a cultural conversation, it's being talked about in sort of culture terms? Are we forgetting about the massive tech infrastructure beneath it all or inside it all or driving it all?
I don't know. At least inside the game industry, absolutely not. From the people that I talk with, no. In fact, it is the fact that as your other guest mentioned, sitting playing Hearthstone, we're in bed. We're constantly thinking of that. What new devices are coming along that we can play with, and that we can create experiences for people on. People are at this point in time heavily investigating VR, in what they can do and what games we can make and what experiences can be had there. So, at least from the industry side, I don't think so much. I would say that one of the challenges that has happened, one of the challenges I'm seeing happen is with the rise of all the different tools that make game making easier, what we're sort of forgetting is the fundamental design skills that are necessary to make a great idea. I mean, we can all type into a keyboard, but not all of us can write, a Pulitzer Prize winning novel. So the design skills, making bad games is now easier than it ever was before, in a sense. And if it's possible to add a point to something that we were discussing earlier about adults playing games and how that's seen as something that's odd, that's really a fairly recent thing. That's something that evolved within the last 200 years. It used to be that only adults would play games, and usually only wealthy people would play games because they're the only ones who had access to them. So it was very much an adult-only pastime. Children wouldn't be doing. It wasn't something that children would do. We don't even. There are very few children's games that were made prior to that time.
Yeah, they just play in an unorganized fashion, and then they would grow up and start playing the real games.
Yeah. So Monopoly is a classic example, and it certainly wasn't designed for kids.
No, and it's in retrospect quite a terrible game. Mechanics-wise, everybody's like that. Because it's all settled. Tobias looks surprised. You roll the dice. It's all in the first round. It's a game of chance that is resolved in the first round, and then it takes 4 hours to finish, and most people never finish it because it becomes pointless. Yeah.
It's painful.
But still, but it's interesting because also there's something so satisfying about games and the narrative of that game that we love it and play it anyway. This does connect back to the thing that we were talking about, the lack of a basic language for speaking about games on a conceptual level. It's very difficult to teach game design if the conceptual toolkit isn't there. Now, many of our viewers are grad students or selecting their specialties in a wide range of fields, of everything from the humanities to very, very hard tech. If you would be, at this point in your career, thinking about wanting to get into games, what would you, but looking for a specialty, looking for a discipline to study, what would you pick today? Who would like to start? Björn?
Yeah,
okay,
sure.
Björn?
I would go to KTH and computer science, of course. But before I did that, I would have followed my passion, and I would do a lot of things. I would explore so many things on my free time. And
like what kinds of things?
Any type. If you're interested in something, then you want to explore how is that done? How did they do that? And to have that constant interest in how people have done things, to see what is good and what can I do better, what can I do different, to constantly play games, try and produce them, try and reproduce stuff I like from the games, and to do that as my pastime. That's what I would do in my free time.
And then in the daytime you would study computer science. Very well. Brenda, what would you do?
Oh, absolutely the same thing. So one of my fears is that a lot of people are waiting until they go to college to start, that's when they're actually going to start studying for what they want to do for the rest of their lives, especially if they're passionate about games. But the reality is they need to start coding now. People who got into the game industry when I did in the early 80s, I started coding when I was, I think, 13. My husband started coding when he was 11, in assembly language at that. So, and by the time he would have graduated college, he already had his 10 years in. So it's learn how to code no matter what your discipline in games is, whether you want to be an artist, a designer, a producer. Learning how to code, getting that sense of digital literacy is absolutely critical. And start making games now. Get your bad games out of the way. For most people, For most people, it's usually 10 years. 10 years is when the hit might happen, unless you join a studio that's already moving and making some really good stuff, and do your apprenticeship there. But get coding and get making games. It is the most important thing you can do if this is what you want to do for a living. Don't wait till college.
What about Sigurlina? You're smiling at the get coding. What else?
Yeah,
or is it just programming for you as well?
No, I think that for me, when I started working at the game company by accident 8 years ago, I think that, yes, I would have assumed that I needed to have learned coding and need to know coding. So if I was starting out today with the ambition of getting into games, I definitely would have studied computer science more than I did. But I find that my engineering background is great for the type of large-scale production work that I do. But what I think that many people don't know is that for the large game companies, there's a lot of jobs for people in different fields. It's the animators, it's the 3D artists, it's the classically educated painters that are the concept artists. And then, of course, there's various different fields like, legal, HR support, etc. So a lot of people working with me, as an example, are working in games, even though they have studied disciplines that are quite far removed from game development. So anyone can work in games, but if your passion is creating them, then I completely agree with Brenda in that coding, you'll never regret knowing how to code, how to implement your ideas.
What about Tobias? What would you start to study today if you wanted to get into games?
Well, to be honest, when I started working with games 2006, I told them honestly, I don't know any software. I'm a filmmaker. I don't know anything about technology. I said, no, the only software you need to master is PowerPoint.
Is it because you teach, or is it because
everyone was always doing PowerPoints about everything? Everyone, but internal presentations about the work you do. And I think that I would advise any young person, never learn PowerPoint, whatever you do, but follow your obsession. If you're not obsessed by something, do something else, because you have to spend so much time mastering whatever you do. And I think it has to go beyond passion. It has to be more like an obsession. It's a lifestyle in a way. But I mean, obviously, there's. If I was young today, I would go into VR. I think it seems so exciting.
We're going to have to talk about that now. But let's do Petter first. If you were wanting to study games or do games today, what would you do? Would it still be robotics?
Yeah, well, I love robotics. I don't want to get into games.
And you seem to be getting the best of both worlds.
Yeah, kind of.
And actually, in a way, we were mentioning this before, the stuff that you're doing is connected to these ideas of virtual realities, although you are building them by putting stuff in the real world and accessing it in a virtual manner. But I think that when we are mostly talking about VR, which we've been dropping in this conversation many times, we're referring to the fact that we are currently at a technological shift point where virtual reality helmets, as we used to call them in the 90s, now they're more like glasses, that you can put in your handbag, will become widely available commercially and affordable within the next 3-year period, most likely. How do you feel that this will affect the games industry? Who would like to go first? Brenda?
Oh, I have it in some sense. I have very much a wait and see approach. It is an entirely new platform, totally immersing somebody into a space. So I know it's running on computers, and I know it's using a lot of the same stuff we do now, and that you are seeing that we can put you virtually in a space that before you were sitting behind a computer at. But if we look at the history of games, so all that said, if we look at the history of games, it's all about minimum effort, absolute minimum effort for maximum output. So in a game where I'm just going nuts and jumping all over the place, my hands are effectively like this. Like that's my effort, right? So the thought of like doing, moving like crazy to make something happen in a game, I don't know that is an experience that I want, right? And I don't know how long you could make those experiences be. But I think the promise of this technology is in different types of experiences. For instance, there's a game I had a chance to check out called Adrift, which is not released yet. But that type of experience, and I don't know how much I can say about it, so I won't say much about it. But that type of experience is incredibly moving. And it is a game.
Could you give us like a genre, perhaps, or some word to help us?
Oh boy.
Is it, or an emotion?
It's no, it's not an emotion. So it's basically it's Adam Orth's game, and it's about being basically something happens in space and you're alone.
Yeah. Okay.
And you have to try to put your ship back together, and again, I don't know how much more I can say about it, so I'll leave it at that.
That's good. Then we have some idea. So certainly the role, the player's role as a very strong subject position. That's one of the things that will change. Does anybody else have something? Sigurlina, are you excited about VR?
Yes, I am excited about VR. I have tried some of the demos and I have thought quite a lot about it. I have a hard time extending my mind to sort of see you engulfing yourself in VR for hours on end, like you immerse yourself in some games. So I think I don't exactly know how you will play these experiences and how it will work in multiplayer games, as an example, or where you're playing games with others. But I definitely think it's a very immersive experience and very interesting. So I'm like Brenda, I'm waiting and seeing, very curious, but maybe not super convinced that it will go in the direction that we think it might go. I think it might go somewhere completely different.
Björn is nodding.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I don't think it's a game changer in that respect. I'm very impressed with Oculus Rift in this that paved the way for a hype and a strong enthusiasm in VR again. I think they made a lot of wise commercial choices in linking very early to a domain, in this case the gaming industry, and providing early access, as we talked about earlier. It's still not a product, but it's still, I think it's close to 150 ported projects, games on Steam supporting Oculus, which is just amazing. And in the last 6 months, we have like 10 other competing hardware companies doing very similar things. So kudos on the hype and the interest and the promise in a technology that we haven't seen for quite some time such an interest in.
Yeah.
But immersion, I think, is something that they trying to monopolize on, which I think is ridiculous, because immersion is a psychological state. We can be immersed in so many other things that we don't need that much technology for. So take that out of it, but we can be very immersed in a book still.
I'd like to take some questions from the audience at this point. Does the audience have a question to ask? Be brave, yes. Please stand up and state your name and perhaps your university affiliation, if you have one, and then ask away. Yes.
Hi, my name is Wind, and I'm a student at Life, at least.
Very good.
And I'm not very well bewildered in the universe of gaming, but been traveling the world, one may possibly say, real-life gaming.
Yes.
And in addition to the gaming and development around it and how that shapes our future, I'm interested in how the games shape the future. And maybe I thought you would be a good panel to ask. For example, structures of the game, new structures, creative structures, how may they shape our minds? And content, let's ask the question, what are the, let's say, prominent trends of constructive gaming development, which would be something different than violence, creating violence in real life, for example, like this from...
If it were doing that.
If it were, of course, like a typical, stereotypical example, maybe boring, but from films and things like this. What would be that kind of most important, if you were to judge with like value-based from your point of view, of course, most important tendencies, trends, ideas that are coming up now that could constructively?
Let's do that. Let's talk about, and we also haven't covered that end of things very much. So what are games bringing out in society, and what could they or should they be bringing out? Let's start with Tobias. Thank you for your question.
Well, I think Jesus, that's a big question.
You get to pick like a segment of it.
Yeah. I think, for example, I don't think Facebook would have been as popular without a foundation of computer gamers, because in a way Facebook is a game, because you sort of collect and you upgrade and stuff like that. I think the notion of gamification is interesting to see how various aspects of society tends to be measured in another way. I'm not saying it's either good or bad, but I think the influence of game mechanics in other areas is it's probably going to be more and more present in all walks of life.
And that could certainly be problematic if the idea of game mechanics is reduced only to competitive structures, for instance. While they are, of course, all kinds of things. But in gamification, typically not the width of game mechanics isn't always represented in gamification as a buzzword, certainly. Björn, what would you have to say?
Yeah, we have. There are a lot of terms now that are being appropriated by other domains that are linked to games because, of course, they recognize the huge engagement. And back in the 90s was the last time it was appropriated, and then it was called edutainment and these all this. Then we should use digital means to enhance learning in different ways. It didn't really work out. We see what happens this time around. Gamification is something that is spreading rapidly and is being used by more and more companies in trying to borrow aspects of engagement and enthusiasm and dedication to the task and trying to solve other boring tasks that they need to be done. And you could be very naive, and we have some horrible examples, but we also have some examples that show some promise in that respect, if it's done with some knowledge about how you make games and how you can, and not look too much on only the mechanics, because entering times into a timesheet is still boring, even if I get a banner or a reward or something. It's still a horrible task.
What about the content side of things? Then there seems to be there was a relatively clear implication in this question that maybe the content of games isn't always the most constructive. How do you feel about this? I'm looking perhaps at Sigurlina. I'm sure you get to answer this question all the time, but how do you feel about this personally? What games could do?
I feel quite strongly about what games could do, and what they do is what they teach you, hand-eye coordination, problem solving, thinking very fast, playing with friends, building in multiplayer games, big societies of friends, and teaching people to work together. So I feel like games bring a lot of constructive elements into our lives that we might not see unless we take a look at it and think about it. Because I think it's easy to sort of give games a bad rap or make assumptions that games that depict a certain element influence that in people's lives, which hasn't really been proven. Yeah. But then I think if we talk about it in the smaller games, I see my kid, my 2-year-old, playing with a tablet game and learning the alphabet way before I actually started thinking about teaching her the alphabet, because she picks it up from a neatly constructed learning game. And I think that those are sort of micro and macro examples of what games teach you and what games bring you. And in some cases, they bring you societies of people, like work together in the game EVE Online that my previous company made, where 350,000 people play together in the same universe, forming a real virtual universe.
I'm realizing we're running out of time, so I would like to take a little round with everybody asking this question, because we're in the business of looking at the future. I'm picking a random number. 10 years from now, what will have changed in games or games culture? All kinds of things, but you get to make one prediction. Brenda, would you like to start?
Man, these questions are always the ones I dread, because I know it's exactly how people will make fun of me 10 years from now.
Okay, yeah. Then let's make this even harder. Let's do one sentence each.
Parents making games with their kids.
Parents making games with their kids. Sigurlina, what do you think?
Everyone will be playing games.
Yes. Björn?
Participating and building.
Yes. Petter?
Retired people playing games with their grandchildren.
Yes. Tobias?
I think we will be playing shooters on FIFA.
Still?
Yeah, still. I think, we did it 10 years ago. We're going to do it 10 years from now.
Very well. So spoke Tobias Falk, Brenda Romero, Sigurlina Ingvarsdottir, Björn, Thuresson, Petter Ögren. Thank you all. Crosstalks will be back next month with an exciting talk about contemporary education. Be sure to check in at crosstalks.tv for updates on topics and guests. And for now, be safe and be brave.